Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Graykowski, creator of the Better Brain Blueprint. Welcome to another edition of Master Mindset. We have a special edition today because it has to do with our future generations. And I've chosen Heather Caplinger, our guest for today, because of not only what she did before she had children. She has an 18-month-old right now, Calvin, and as you can probably see, she's due in the next couple weeks. Some of her strategies to prepare for pregnancy and also how she's raised her son so far are pretty amazing. And in practice for 30 years as a lifetime family wellness office, we want to make sure that our patients are doing the right things to create a healthy environment for future kids. So Heather, just a little bit of background on her. She has her bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's degree in child psychology. And a lot of people know what to do, but they don't actually put into action steps. And I think the biggest thing with Heather, she's an action girl. She learns something and she puts it into place. So we're going to learn some great strategies today, not only for you if you're pregnant or maybe you have children that are going to be looking at having their kids or your grandkids. This is a great strategy to really learn how you can think better, eat better, certain action steps, and how we should be moving our bodies. So thanks for joining me, Heather.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, I know that when you were looking at having children, I remember discussing with you, and you already had this mindset that you wanted to create the best environment to detoxify your body. You know, sometimes we aren't as maybe focused on our nutrition or certain things, but you, even before you were looking at having children with your husband Matt, you were having some great strategies. So do you have any things you want to share as far as maybe what you did, certain foods you eliminated, or just your mindset in general?
So when we had the discussion, knowing in the next few years we were going to have kids, for lack of a better term, I acted pregnant. I determined what foods really increased not only our ability to get pregnant, but what foods the baby was going to need. I know that a lot of women struggle. Once they get pregnant, they want to get really healthy, but they ingrained those habits in the past, and so old habits die hard. And so you can easily slip back into cravings when you're pregnant if it's not something that you prepared for before. So almost 2 years before we decided to have kids, my husband and I completely gave up fast food and soda. We weren't big fast food and sodas drinkers anyways, but we completely cut it out of our diet in January 2010. And then when we decided to kind of go in the progression of having kids, about 8 to 10 months before what's the word I'm looking for? I observed a pregnancy diet. I didn't eat refined sugars. I didn't drink sodas. I cut out caffeine, nitrates, deli meats, just a lot of different things. And then I increased my proteins and my vegetables, and then really stuck to my vitamin regimens, added in protein smoothies, etc. So I kind of acted pregnant 6 to 9 months before we actually got pregnant, for that matter.
You know what you said, that strategy of acting pregnant, you know, act as if. That's a powerful strategy, because a lot of people wait till after the fact to try and fix a problem rather than really creating a proactive steps. So what was it, a lot of challenges happen when I work with women. They just feel like they can't give up fast food, or they can't give up their sodas, or they're, going through McDonald's. They just feel like they, you must have thought and known something at a deeper level that this is toxic stuff for my body and my baby.
Yeah, growing up in a healthy environment, again, I wasn't an excessive eater, but I was a college student, and that food is inexpensive, and it's easy, and it's fast, and it's right there in front of you. And when I really looked at the small amount of time that you carry a child, it seemed like such a small sacrifice in the amount of time I was on them. So I said, if all else fails and I really still want that stuff, I'm at least going to give it up for my pregnancy. But then the more I started researching it, and the more I thought, well, if I'm not going to feed it to myself, why should I feed it to my baby, and vice versa? It became every day I didn't have it, I craved it less. And now even the idea of eating it, it's almost a visceral response. I don't want to call it an addiction, but I almost treat it like an addict, in which I just avoid it completely, because it is easy, it is fast. Some of it does taste good, for lack of a better term. But I never felt good afterwards. So I just decided to treat it kind of like it was something that was no longer in my life, and we just don't even put the temptation in front of us.
Well, I know that we'll talk about things as we go through this process of maybe certain foods that you absolutely said I'm no to, that a lot of people don't realize that are not good for the development of the baby. And
Absolutely.
Our nervous system in a child is the very first system to develop. After about 4 days after conception, you can start to see a little bump forming, and about 2 weeks afterwards starts the development of the brain and the spinal cord. So within literally 4 weeks, our vision and our taste buds, and over the next couple months, so literally sometimes before a woman knows she's even pregnant, the baby's already developing. So it's important to obviously...
Which is part of the reason why we acted pregnant.
Exactly. So since we're talking a little bit on the nutrition, the eating aspect, obviously you have the mindset, having the knowledge that you do, but putting into action is powerful. But the mindset of eating, I know that there's a big controversy about different types of foods, preservatives, gluten, GMO foods. So what's your opinion? Why would you want to avoid, say, genetically modified foods?
So the way that I looked at it is women have been having babies for millions, hundreds of thousands of years, and I tried to look at it in my own nutrition as the least touched items. Genetically modified foods, I have done a lot of research myself, and I know that there's a lot of opinions in either direction, and people, believe what they want to believe. But for me, when I looked down to it, there was too much interference before the food actually became a food, in my opinion. And they just haven't been around long enough for people to really understand the processional effect that's going to happen. And it's such a little, it's a little baby and it's got a fighting chance. And I just didn't want to add more interference into the process that they're already going through. I mean, it's an exhausting process if you obviously know a lot about the development of babies, and so much is happening every day in such a rapid amount of time. I didn't want anything to slow it down.
Yes.
Or interfere with it. So the genetically modified foods, the preservatives, I still eat, my crackers or whatever it may be, but they're whole grain, they're flax, they're always, if it comes in a box in our house, it is always organic. And it's always low in sugars and a lot of the additives. So that's just what we kind of stuck with.
So what's your opinion with genetically modified foods? Obviously, they are not natural.
Yeah.
They've been genetically modified.
Yeah.
A lot of the chemicals that they're finding will cross the blood-brain barrier. And in a baby's nervous system, 250,000 cells are made every minute in the developmental process. Think about that. And if you've got something that's altering the way that the body is developing, it's going to alter the development. So you can have things that they're showing certain aspects and chemicals can lead to autism and other challenges that the children develop and are actually born with. So if you look at foods that might be the average staple for a person, like milk.
Yeah.
So do you what do you do as far as, do you drink milk, or
we are not a milk drinking household. We do have forms of dairy in our house. It is not we choose not to have cow's milk. And when I say dairy, I use that term loosely because dairy is really coming from an animal. So we have almond milks and cashew milks. We're very, because just like anything that's been, taken in its whole form and turned into something else, we're very particular about either making it from home or the brands that we choose, because they can have a lot of additives. Again, they all are always organic. And we do actually have goat's milk in our house, but it's local. It's local, and we know the farm, and I get it from a farmer's market, and that's just what we choose. We're cheese people. I love cheese, but I'm very particular about the brands that I choose. And again, just like if it came in a box, if it's been processed, it's always organic in our house, and it's eaten in moderation. If I was to take everything that I loved out of my diet when I got pregnant, I wouldn't have been successful. So there are ebbs and flows. So we just took some things completely out. They are no longer even in our food vocabulary. And then the other ones we just altered.
So what are some of the things that you just cut off.
So things that I completely cut off, and this is a big one, and there are a lot of varying opinions, but for me, I cut out caffeine 100%. I worked with kids. I see what caffeine does, maybe not necessarily to me in small amounts, but what it does to little bodies.
Sure.
And so I have a very little body in there, and I just chose to cut caffeine out completely. Now, a lot of moms would probably call me crazy, or people call me crazy, because again, they say 8 ounces a day is fine in moderation, etc. But for me, it was just easier to not have it. Another thing that I was very, very strict on was nitrates. I cut out all of your deli meats, all of your processed meats, your pepperonis, your things like that, hot dogs, and pretty much anything that was overly processed. Just because, again, while there's a lot of varying studies, nitrates affect the brain. So anything that affects the brain, especially because I have my degree in child psychology and I worked with kids in the spectrum, autism to Asperger's to dissociative identity disorder, I just really wanted my kid to have a fighting chance.
Sure.
So the foods, caffeines and nitrates, again, we went to an all organic diet, whole foods, and the big one was artificial sugars and high fructose corn syrup.
Yes.
If it was a processed sugar, I gave up candies. I still enjoy my chocolate, but now it's dark chocolate and it's whole. It's not, caramel wrapped, whatever.
With all the sugar additives.
With all the sugar additives.
Yeah.
And I feel better. I never felt great after eating that stuff. So
sure.
Those are our big no's.
That's important to understand, because a lot of people don't realize it's, what's wrong with a pepperoni pizza? But you've got obviously the milk products. Milk products, the caseins, it's a certain type of protein in there, is the highest allergen. Mm-hmm. So here's what happens. Our immune system is developing, and our immune system develops through foreign things. And if we've got that in our diet, children come into this world and they have a much higher incidence of having asthma problems, having certain types of allergies. In fact, the biggest thing is chronic ear infections. So the mother, even drinking milk, can have those foreign proteins pass through if they're breastfeeding to the baby or during the development. So dairy products are really not a good thing to be eating. So I'm glad you gave some alternate choices.
And that actually happened to us. I did eat it in moderation with my pregnancy, but when my son was born and we were nursing, we nursed for 14 months, he had, for the good first 6 months of his life, I know I don't drink milk, but if I had an ice cream cone or cheese on something, even if it was whole and all natural and whatever it may be, he had an intolerance to it. So I completely cut out dairy, all forms of dairy, for a solid 6 months, and then just slowly added.
I know that many years ago I went to a pediatric conference, and Lyndon Smith, the top pediatrician in the country, he went through the whole mechanism of when a person eats dairy products and how it tied in with ear infections, bedwetting, because of how it affects the kidneys. And people just go, well, how's that tie in? Well, it really ties in with the systems of the body and how the nervous system sees things as foreign. So you started to talk about breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And, breastfeeding, it's one of the most natural, most important things in the development of a baby. So you breastfed for probably about the first year, right?
14 months.
14 months.
Until I got pregnant with my second, and then suddenly my son didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay.
Things change. Your body changes, the hormones change, the milk. So for us, and I was always told that you really follow a child's lead when it comes to nursing. From the moment they're born, we read our children. While schedules are absolutely important, and we had our son on a schedule, especially in the beginning, it's really all about reading their cues. So for him, he weaned beautifully, and is, healthy, strong kid because it came at a really natural point for us.
So obviously the colostrum is very important in the
Huge.
development, especially the first 6 to 8 weeks of nursing. If anything, that first 6 to 8 weeks really has a lot to do with the development of the immune system. With that process of breastfeeding, the other thing is if a baby is eating formulas, we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. You didn't use those formulas, and I'm going to give some reasons why you would not want to do that is they've found studies of the sucking reflex.
Correct.
And when a woman uses both breasts, it actually changes the position and they suck on different parts. And it affects the brainstem, it affects the homolateral aspects and the development. So kids that have that sucking response are less chances of having dyslexia and neurological problems.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the breast milk itself, it's the action of that. So if a woman is not breastfeeding, changing hands, we tend to always use the right hand to feed the baby. Changing hands does help in that response to build a better brain.
And it was not easy for us in the beginning at all. I saw lactation consultant after lactation consultant. My husband was there at 2 and 4 and 6 in the morning. My son dropped almost 1.5 pounds in the first week of his life. They were really worried. They were really pushing formula. And while I would have never done anything to harm him, my instincts just told me that we were going to figure it out. And we took it moment by moment and day by day. And for us, it was what a lot of women don't realize before they get pregnant, and even some once the baby is born, is you don't feel like they're getting enough. That's the number one question I always hear from a lot of new moms who will ask about nursing. How do I know they're getting enough? And they talk about, the number of diapers, etc. But what you probably realize, but not a lot of people realize, is when they're born, their tummies are smaller than a cherry.
Yeah.
They don't need much. So while it may not feel like you're doing it right, or they're getting enough, or they're fussy or whatever it may be, a lot of the times the fussiness comes from they've been in this wonderful womb environment and now they're out in the world, and not necessarily. So what I try to tell a lot of moms is one day at a time. Every additional day you nurse is that much more that you give to your child. Yes. And if it's 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, or 4 years, whatever you choose to do, it's your journey, and you got to go with your gut.
Yeah, that's a great. You said a couple strategy in there that are powerful, and one is it wasn't easy.
No.
Okay, and unfortunately, in today's society, people take the easy route.
Yeah.
It's really easy to just, feed the baby something that maybe is just not good, or maybe you just are just not really focused on because you're tired. You're exhausted. You just, it's not easy. But I think pre-planning, one thing you've done is you really pre-plan and look so to make sure that you have the appropriate foods, and it does take more energy, but in the long run, it's amazing. Your son is a bright young boy. He's happy. He's energetic, and I know that. His development of his nervous system from the things you've done is going to pay dividends.
Absolutely.
You also said that whether it's 1 day or 1 week, or you have to think of that as like a deposit into that baby's health account. Mm-hmm. So every time you make a deposit, anytime you do something that is not proactive, it's taking a withdrawal. Yeah. And so a lot of babies are withdrawn, and that's why we've got diabetes going through the roof. Mm-hmm. It is horrific. And so the types of foods that most people think, getting back to milk really increases the chance of diabetes. They found a 300% increase in families that eat milk, and more than just 1 glass a day. So you got to really look at alternative aspects in the nutrition.
Dairy tends to make kids crave sugar. It's just a natural response. Yes. And so that's why we chose... And we do a variety. I don't just stick to almond or just stick to cashew or hazelnut or coconut milk. My son probably doesn't realize that he's drinking 10 different kinds, but that's just what we choose to switch it up.
You interject because a lot of people drink soy milk.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say on camera that you should stay away from soy milk. Not only the phytoestrol type of processes they're finding, which is a hormonal challenge with little boys being sterile. This is a big problem. Mm-hmm. Genetically modified corn, soy, and wheat are the 3 highest. So if they're feeding them white bread and they're eating soy milk and high fructose corn syrup, they don't have a chance. Yeah. Their whole body is out of balance, and it creates an environment for dis-ease to develop. Absolutely. Especially not only as a child, but in their later years. So the way you're raising your child is amazing. I know that there are a lot of clinical tests that, if you belong to a certain healthcare organization, that they will recommend that I don't necessarily agree with. A lot of tests are detrimental to the development of the baby. So I want to talk a little bit about that. What clinical tests did you do, and why did you maybe limit them or do those tests to find out more of the health of your baby?
Okay, so to be totally honest, we are a member of Kaiser. They are a wonderful organization for a lot of different things. I, just like the food, did a lot of research before I chose my doctor, and chose a doctor that was going to be okay with us directing our own path slightly. The very first doctor I went to when I found out I was pregnant, I already knew I was pregnant, obviously based on a test, and asked if I could do a blood test instead of a sonogram for confirmation, because they do require one or the other to continue your prenatal care. And that doctor that I saw was very pushy, and I just didn't feel comfortable, and I just kind of stood up and used my voice and said, you know what, I'm going to reschedule this appointment. I'm just not, I want to do a little more research. So the next doctor that I saw, after really asking around, I basically laid it out right in the beginning and said, this is what we want to do. We are limiting our sonograms to one. My son had one sonogram at 20 weeks. Now, I chose to still do that one. Some people choose not to do them at all. One was a selfish reason, because I really did want to find out what I was having. And then the second reason is it's a level 2 sonogram, and they are looking at the development of the spine, the development of the brain. And while at no point did I ever plan on terminating my pregnancy, even if they did find something, it at least helped us be slightly prepared. And it was nice to see, I'm a chiro kid. It was nice to see, the development of that spine and the brain and the hands and the feet. They look at heart chambers and liver chambers and lung. And for me, it just helped prepare me. Sure. If there was a concern, we would at least be prepared for when the child was born. So that was actually the only sonogram that I had my entire pregnancy. On average, it's 6 to 8, and that's a low. That's Kaiser's. I know some friends that have had, upwards of 10 and 12, and then they've even gone to independent facilities and had, 4D or whatever. That's their own decision. For me, I did a lot of research, and again, we just always went back to least interference possible. Sure. I had blood tests done, but they were health blood tests. I didn't have genetic testing. I had no amnios. And the only sonogram I had
was least invasive as possible.
Least invasive as possible. And then towards the tail end of the pregnancy, when they really upped those sonograms, is when I really pushed my doctor, who had been around for a long time, to do more hands-on. We did stethoscope and the horn checking of the heartbeat instead of using the sonograms or the radio waves to check. So
those sound waves in our whole body works on wave patterns, brain wave patterns, and they really don't know how that affects the development of the baby. And so your whole focus was you want it to be as natural and as non-invasive as possible.
Yeah, we err on the side of caution. So because there isn't a lot of research, so while it might not be detrimental, it might be. Sure. And on a lot of those testing, because the medical model is the way to go, for lack of a better term, there really isn't a lot. And for us, we really least interference as possible. I'm just more of a hands-on. Sure. And I have an amazing doctor who completely agrees with me. And we were that way with my delivery as well, as far as being as least invasive as possible.
So I know that with your delivery, so we're going to go there next, you didn't do any type of anything.
No.
It
was 41 hours of love that went into that child. I went into labor. I actually stayed at work for 6 hours because I worked at a chiropractic office and was able to get checked on an hourly basis. And what a lot of women do, I have found, is because it's a very nerve-wracking. It's very unknown, and sure. You're worried about this tiny little baby that they race to the hospital. And for us, I felt like I could be stronger at laboring at home as long as possible without you're at a
Sure,
weak
sure,
point.
yeah.
So you've got a lot of things,
Less variables.
And they're not trying to hurt you. They just see you're in pain. And so their natural response as a hospital is to offer you something to get you out of pain. I didn't even want the option because I didn't know where my weak point was going to be and whether or not I would quote unquote buckle. So I labored for
So no epidurals, nothing.
no epidural, no Pitocin, and we'll get to kind of the post-care, I'm sure. But even when my son was physically born, we did what was called kangaroo care. He went straight to my chest. We did delayed cutting of the umbilical cord. There was no ointment that was put on his eyes. He didn't, have a hepatitis shot or anything. We spent that hour him nursing and just hanging out, basically.
Yes.
And so for us, I had a midwife at Kaiser. She was absolutely amazing. I had a team of nurses. My husband and my mom were there. And for us, it was just, 41 hours of labor and 2 hours of pushing, but we were able to do it all natural. And what I would just tell moms, if you're even thinking of going that way, is you're only as strong as the people in your room.
Sure. You got to have a good support crew.
You do, absolutely.
So who was your support crew during, did you had different therapies? I know that you shared with me that you did yoga and
Absolutely.
you did some massage therapy with a very qualified massage therapist. You were focused in on your posture and nervous system, so you had chiropractic care.
Absolutely.
So
our formula for that was obviously holistic and making sure that my body was at its optimum because childbirth is a very stressful process. And so I wanted to make sure that I hit the ground running.
Sure.
And had a strong body if I was going to be able to go natural. So I, at about 9 weeks pregnant, had a really good friend who said, hey, you want to come to prenatal yoga with me? I had never even thought of it actually, but knew that I needed to continue exercising in some way. And what I found was an absolute incredible core of women who had similar principles, which is so important.
yes.
And while some of them may have chosen to get epidurals, some of them may have ended up in emergency C-sections, we all started at the same point. And we met, every Tuesday, every Thursday. It was an hour of beautiful yoga, completely designed for a pregnant body, about moving the hips and the stretching and then what yoga positions you could use while laboring.
Sure.
To take the pain and the stress off the body. So I did that. I had an amazing prenatal massage therapist, and then our number one thing was chiropractic. I got adjusted every single week, all the way up until I was about 35 weeks, and then 1 to 2 times a week thereafter, just because it's a lot of stress on the body. I was still working full time, and so it really was my chiropractic and my yoga were top, and then the massage therapy just kind of brought it all together towards the tail end of my pregnancy and made it to where my body was at its optimum.
A lot of people just kind of figure, well, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But in today's world, there's a lot more stress on us. There's,
So much.
Obviously with working moms and all the stress of the world is different. It's different than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
So we have to take that time out and really schedule your priorities to make these changes. There is, I know we've had many conversations. There are so many different layers that we can go into. And I know that after the baby's born, within the next several months, that we're going to be doing some post follow-up interview to go into, because we could probably do several different layers, and we've talked about doing a Better Brain baby section so that all the different very specific things from certain vitamins you might need to do. And so did you take omega-3 oils for the
Absolutely, and I upped my omegas when I was pregnant. So I took, for lack of a better term, a dose and a half.
Okay.
And the reason why I did that is they always say it's plus a half. So a woman will say, I'm eating for 2. That's actually not the case. You're only supposed to add 300 to 500 additional calories per day. So it's kind of a diet and a half. So I took a dose and a half. I upped my omegas. And then I did some really extensive research on my prenatals. I chose a vegan, an all-natural, a whole. It was suggested to me by multiple midwives that I talked to. So I made sure that I was actually absorbing those nutrients. So yes, I upped my omegas. and my omega-rich foods, flax seeds and chia seeds and things like that were added into the diet as well.
Obviously we recommend that for brain health is so important because the
Huge.
omega-3 oils, the alpha, or the DHAs, and the different aspects are so important for the cell membrane, the development of the brain and the heart. So that can go, mothers taking them helps pass that on to the babies during the breastfeeding also.
Well, and selfishly, pregnancy is also really hard on your body, and it's exhausting on your brain, and so it felt like it kept me a little clearer as well.
Yeah, less stressed.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you briefly talked about the delivery itself, and I know that if you look at the way women have to deliver babies, especially in this country, when my kids were born, I was there as the coach for the first two, and I delivered my son after seeing what not only my wife but the babies had to go through with all this tugging and pulling processes. I know that you wanted to have as natural a birth without forceps and without suction cups and C-sections, because when a woman has a C-section, the baby does not go through the birth canal, and the compression of the skull and the compression of the lungs actually expels amniotic fluid. So children that are born C-section have a much higher incidence of having allergies and asthma. So I know that in that process of delivery, you're going to be delivering them again in a couple weeks. Anything you'll look at doing differently as far as your position, or maybe the...
Absolutely. So when I was laboring with my son, because it was all so new, even with the massage therapy and the chiropractic, I did have significant back labor, and it had absolutely nothing to do with what was done, and it had to do with the fact that towards the tail end, my son kind of rotated himself and put a lot of pressure on the lower back. But the great thing is because of the posture and the things that I learned, I was able to position myself to relieve that pain. There are some positions now that I've already had that I know work much better than others. Walking was a huge thing, and I would say that I would walk more this time. You're exhausted. But really the main thing is I delivered slightly on my side on an elevated point, and I pushed for 2.5 hours. And this time I plan on delivering squatting.
Sure. Gravity works for you.
Gravity works for you. And I was exhausted 40 hours into labor and partially on oxygen towards the tail end of that point, which is probably why I didn't get up on a bar or didn't even think of asking. But now that I know what to expect, it's already been written in my hospital file. It's on the top of my birth plan. My nurses, before I get to that exhaustion point, will know our preference is for me to deliver with the squat bars.
Rather than just jumping into a C-section.
I don't want to push for 2 hours again.
Got it. I get it.
I would like it to be a faster process. And from the research I've done excessively since my son's been born, that natural elevation, the squatting or the sitting, kind of up in more of a primal stance is just what works better.
Yeah. We human beings try and recreate everything, try and make things better, but really when you get down to it, using the forces of nature and using things that are natural
gravity
are always a better. I mean, you see these pictures of people in the fields delivering a baby just squatting down. It's like rather than laying on your back, which is easier for the doctor, it's not easier for the mom.
Correct.
So I'm glad that you're sharing those, because a lot of women don't even think about that. In our conversations, I know that we could go so many layers deep, and we're not going to get into all of that today. I know that we've talked about why should a person vaccinate or not vaccinate. I look at the cocktails of chemicals that they're injecting in a baby's brain, and their blood-brain barrier is so susceptible in the first year. So you could cut, if you're going to do that, make sure you do your research and really look at what types of vaccinations and when they might need to be done. The developing immune system is so critical. So I know we're going to have more conversations on the immune system and vaccinations in that first year of life after a baby's born. So in closing here, I know the thing that I get from you is, number one, it's not about you. It's about your baby. Because as you know, a mother's instinct is so critical and so powerful. And when a mom really just takes that and really shifts it into the baby, I've seen women that go through huge transformations after having children. And not only in their own life, but their own, how they feel about everything.
Yeah.
And they change their way they eat. They change everything. So babies can, well, obviously transform your life for a lot of years.
Yeah.
But if you were to look at, say, the top 5 things that you would highly recommend to do as you're either preparing for pregnancy or you're pregnant right now that maybe you just didn't realize, what would those top 5 things do that's a must?
So I would say structurally get your body where it needs to be. The childbirth process, child-rearing process, and pregnancy process is difficult. If you make sure your chiropractic massage therapy, I'm not saying you need to go out and lose 100 pounds and, start running marathons, but even if it was just adding 30 minutes of walking a day, if you're not a person who really likes to exercise, if yoga is not available to you, because it's not available to everybody, making sure that you're keeping movement. So really that structure, making sure that your spine and nervous system, your hips, your body are really where they need to be. Get a great chiropractor. In my opinion, get a great massage therapist that understands the female body. I happen to choose one who was a midwife doula, so she really understood that whole process. Your foods you eat is so huge. Even if you take the top 5 things you really shouldn't be eating and you cut out 3 of them,
Sure.
You're better than you were if you weren't.
Baby steps, one
at a time. If your coffee is not something you're willing to give up, to me, the high fructose corn syrup, the fast foods, the heavy processed foods, the nitrates, those are your huge ones. Take them out of your diet. They're not doing anything for you. They're not doing anything for your baby. Get a really good support system. For me, it was the moms that I met in prenatal, it was about our brain. So you need that mental, you're going all day long, especially as a second-time mom. It's been even more important. It's my moment. It's my hour to breathe, to reset, I have my off days. I have my days where maybe I didn't eat great or I'm not feeling 100%, but I get to that class and I have this support system and we realize
it resets things.
It resets things and it gives me an hour of peace and quiet. I don't think enough people, you turn off your phone, you unplug.
I think that's not only good for moms, it's good for the dads. Because dads are trying to figure out all this stuff too. Yes. And, the guys, obviously I have 3 grown children and I didn't know a lot of those things. So I think that's very important because sometimes moms don't necessarily take care of themselves.
They don't. We tend to take care of everybody else first, and selfishly, that's my 2 hours a week. And if you look at a week and how many hours there are, those 2 hours don't seem like anything. Yeah. But they make my whole week.
That's less than 1%. That's like 0.5% of the entire.
But that hour that's my hour. I mean, that's my moment to myself. My massages are more body work than their massages. My adjustments, they all feel like they are
keeping your body centered.
Yeah, they're my moments. They're selfishly what I do for myself. And then it just benefits my child. So I would definitely say your foods, your support systems, keep your movement. And then the last big one is, what are you putting into your brain while you're pregnant? This may sound silly, but I monitor the TV shows, the people that I'm around, the movies that I watch, that excessive language, that violence or that negative energy. I'm in a capsule when I'm pregnant, and even especially when I have a child. Once the baby's born and that child is around, I'm very sensitive to the outside forces that are penetrating the body.
If you look at our brain is a memory organ, so you put these visual pictures that stimulate our brain to get revved up. So it creates that fight or flight. They did studies, and if a woman is stressed, the development part of the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with higher level executive thinking, is much smaller in children where the mother is stressed. The back part of the brain where that fight or flight is actually more developed, and the child will actually be more agitated and stressful just by what we're thinking, how that's going along our nervous system. Dr. Emoto, he's a famous scientist that looked how it's called the hidden messages in water. Our body's 80% water, and that electromagnetic wave affects the vibration of the entire nervous system and entire body, so it develops abnormal cells. there's so much we could talk about, but the thing I wanted to really have you share in this interview is just, it's not easy, but it's really about a big picture. It's about baby steps. It's about maybe what one thing can I do to think a little bit better, start putting better, good stuff in my brain as far as what I'm watching. How can I look at, we all pretty much know what foods we should not be eating, and we don't want to should all over ourselves, but we do want to look at what one little thing we could do, what action step, maybe getting into have a structural evaluation, especially if you're going to be pregnant, see if the hips are in proper balance. You can really determine if the pregnancy is going to be easier or harder based upon the hips and the alignment of the spine.
Absolutely.
And then create movement now. Like you said, just walking a half hour a day creates a healthy pelvis, great movement.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go deeper into some interviews in the future, but I really respect Heather because she is really a master at taking things that we should know we should be doing and putting them into action. And it shows. It's not only shows in your health, but your baby's health and your future baby's health. So thank you, Heather, for taking time today in our Master Mindset interview. And I look forward to future talks and future information for our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Give me a hug.